There's a lot going on in my country now with the Trump administration and Elon Musk and all of that. But without getting into the politics of it, if you just ask yourself, do those two guys appear to be happy? And I would suggest that they're not. When you go around thinking that the rest of the world are a bunch of victims and a bunch of people that only need to be scammed and controlled, you don't feel very connected to much. It's got to be, and of course, when you're telling a lot of things that aren't quite accurate and quite true, then you got to keep track of it all. And on some level, there's just a great deal of dissatisfaction there. It's not something that I look forward to.
Welcome to They're Not Like Us, the podcast where bold ideas and inspiring stories come to life. I'm your host, Aaron, here to challenge the norms and ignite your potential. If you're ready to level up, don't forget to subscribe and join the movement. Now, let's dive in. Hello, welcome back to They're Not Like Us. As always, I'm your host, Aaron, and today I am joined by Bob Martin. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you on, mate. Can you tell people a little bit about yourself, please?
Yeah. Well, 75 years, it's not such a little bit. But yeah, so I grew up in amusement parks and carnivals because my dad found that his path to what we call the American dream was through popcorn and cotton candy. So that was an interesting childhood. Never expected to become a lawyer, but strange set of circumstances got me there. And I just to give you a little time frame, my dad was born in 1898. Whew. So I was in college during the 60s and 70s, and then was a lawyer in Miami during the days when, the movie Scarface, and Miami Vice, during those cocaine cowboy days, those crazy days of Miami.
Yeah, man.
Those were my days. We hit the mob. As a prosecutor, we hit the mob up on a civil case for a lot of money. And when I went out into private practice, they came to see me. It was a little scary at first, I have to say. They basically said that I had to be pretty good because they had good lawyers, and somehow I managed to beat them. So they wanted to hire me. So I started out that part of my career as a mob lawyer. And it was interesting times. But later on, things were kind of falling apart personally. I was seeing a therapist, and turned out, again, it's like almost throughout my life there have been, and again, this is a little bit above my pay grade, and I don't know if the universe really conspires to make things happen in our lives or not. But it just seems like doors open for me here and there that were extraordinary. And one of the doors that opened for me was that my therapist was one of the main devotees, a student and the English language editor for a 72nd generation Taoist master from the Shaolin Temple, the Kung Fu Tai Chi temple. And I met him and immediately wanted to know what he knew. Just one of those people that, you just know they've got it together. And I studied under Master Ni for 6 years, and it changed my life.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting change as well, isn't it? From from law into that kind of spirituality, and so that the two don't often. You wouldn't think of them going hand in hand, would you?
You wouldn't, except that one of the things that I noticed even throughout my career, that the best lawyers are full of compassion and humor and understanding, and are in many ways non-judgmental. And you kind of have to be when you're representing child molesters and rapists and the like. You really do have to be a little bit non-judgmental to be able to deal with that. But the best lawyers really care. They really care about their clients. And so it's really not that big a jump as you might think.
Yeah, well, when you think about it, I suppose that's the same for all walks of life, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the best people in all jobs and industries and ways of life are the people who actually care about other people and try to support and help other people. And if we all did that, the world would be a better place, right?
Correct. One of my other great mentors, which was my father, he always used to say to me, you just take care of your business and your business will take care of you. Devote yourself to that something greater than you, and you don't really have to worry about being taken care of.
Yeah, and you see that a lot as well, Bob. Right? You see it in different guises. You see it in the spirituality side of things. You see it even people who teach in business and stuff. It's all about finding your why, finding that bigger purpose, something bigger than yourself, something that to follow, so something that is always there and always exists. Because if we just chase money, for instance, and then we get the amount of money that we want or the fast car or whatever it is, I think people who do achieve them things realize actually that's not what happiness is.
Yeah,
That's
really.
just and then you've kind of almost lost your purpose then to a degree as well. Your purpose needs to be bigger than materialistic things. It needs to be bigger than these just small goals, and it needs to be something that kind of transcends all that, really.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot going on in my country now with the Trump administration and Elon Musk and all of that. But without getting into the politics of it, if you just ask yourself, do those two guys appear to be happy? And I would suggest that they're not. When you go around thinking that the rest of the world are a bunch of victims and a bunch of people that only need to be scammed and controlled, you don't feel very connected to much. And it's got to be, and of course, when you're when you're telling a lot of things that aren't quite accurate and quite true, then you got to keep track of it all. And on some level, there's just a great deal of dissatisfaction there. It's not something that I look forward to.
No, I think from my perspective, and it's not just a political thing. Obviously, I'm not in the US, so I have a different view on things potentially than people in the US. But it's they're looking to kind of close everything down and isolate America, and that
Mm-hmm.
to me seems strange. When that you prided yourself on being the global superpower and the force for good in the world, essentially tried to
Mm-hmm.
be, tried to allow people to be free and kind of have a good standard of living, a good way of life for everybody in the world, and kind of championed that for such a long time. And
Mm-hmm.
then it's kind of undoing that a little bit now by saying that we're going to close off from the rest of the world. It's us against everybody. And that kind of, I don't know, it sends a bit of a message that doesn't sit well with me, really.
No, it doesn't sit well with me either. And there's many, many, many of us that it doesn't sit well with. If there are protests coming up and people are coming together, it's a funny thing. So many people talk about bringing people together. Well, this guy is finally bringing people together in protest. Bringing people together, who are upset. And it's just terrible stuff. I coined a phrase to describe how me and so many other of us who are upset with what's going on, I call it existential heartbreak. And, especially like somebody like me who spent 40 years as a service of in the service of justice, 40 years, working with people at the edge of existence and, having as my backbone this idea of the rule of law and as a way of, keeping the craziness of humanity in check in some way, and to seeing it being dismantled, step by step is truly heartbreaking. And yet I stay happy.
Yeah, and we've got to through it all, right? Ultimately, these things are out of our control to a massive degree, and we've got to keep doing the right thing and keep moving forward, right? Because if we don't do that, then how can we expect other people to?
That's right. That's right.
But it does upset me though the way that, and it's not just the US. It seems to be worldwide, there seems to be a massive divide where there's this polarity where it kind of pushes people apart, and politics does that a lot. The media does that a lot. We should, when we should all be coming together, and I'm talking even within the nations themselves, we should be coming together, not kind of pushing apart. It's horrible to see, really, when it's kind of this divide and conquer kind of approach.
Yeah. But the one thing that's important is to remember not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Like take the media, for example. There's been so much out there with people trying to destroy faith and confidence in the media, and so much media and social media that is inaccurate that all of a sudden we throw all of the media out and saying it's all trustworthy, but it's not. There are good media sources. You just have to be a little bit more discerning.
Yeah, and I suppose it's difficult, and people need to be a bit wise to where they consume their media and kind of where the sources are, what they come from. Because there are a lot of stuff on social media specifically that's just scaremongering or nonsense that's put out, which is upsetting. But me personally, I don't watch the news. I try to consume as little media as possible. I mean, it's difficult to ignore the big things. They get kind of shoved down your throat anyway because they're everywhere and everybody's talking about them. But I try to avoid it. I stopped watching the news in 2016. And my life's been better for it because it was just making me miserable. It's just, honestly, it's just bad news, and it's constantly trying to divide people and push people, into two separate camps, and I'm not into that.
No, I understand, and I would offer something, to that, because you are not. I mean, I teach on college campuses, and I've got 36 students in my business law class, and many of them have taken the same position. They don't follow the news and the like, and yet I find that they're very anxious. And sometimes I wonder whether that anxiety is like the kind of anxiety that you have before you go to the dentist. Because once you get to the dentist, you find out it's not as bad as you imagined. And I worry about some of them that, without paying attention to what's going on in the environment around them and in the systems around them, do they start to become anxious about how bad it really is without knowing how it is, worried that what's going to hit them from behind the head when they don't know it, and the like. So, my suggestion, from my perspective, and, with meditation and the like, is to go ahead and become aware of what's going on, but at the same time, put some intentionality in bringing beauty into your life to balance it off. That's where I think we have a lost art. We don't intentionally, with the same kind of intentionality that we take care of our business obligations and our family obligations, I think we have an obligation to beauty. I think we have an obligation to awe, to, bringing those things into our consciousness that invigorate us and enlighten us and give us a chance to feel like there is good and worthiness, still in the world. But, that's just me.
No, you're definitely right on that. We do need to, I think I'm terrible for it, and I think a lot of people I know are terrible for not intentionally, enjoying, nature or the things that you enjoy, the things that are around us, the little moments in the day that, that are positive things, and we don't intentionally, even when they happen on their own, we don't intentionally kind of celebrate them almost and enjoy it and take that time to just have that moment. We're too quick to push it past us and then just get on with something else because we're busy. We've got other things to do.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
one of the things that I've heard that the Irish say about emotions is not I'm happy and not I'm sad or not I'm hungry, but they might say that sadness is upon me. And I kind of like that because it distinguishes between identifying with the emotion that's passing through me with the understanding that it will pass through me and it'll be replaced by something else. But for the moment, this is what I'm experiencing. And I kind of like that perspective.
Yeah, I like that, and I think that's something that's quite similar to um, a practice that I use or have used in the past. At least I've not used it much recently, but I probably should. It's something called non-duality. I don't know if you know much about that,
Sure.
but essentially that's again very similar. Is that emotions will kind of come and go and pass through you. You're the kind of the vessel, so you can be aware of them, but you don't have to kind of get dragged down by these things. You just be aware of it. You let it run its course, and you kind of focus on what you can control, and just be at peace with where you're at. Sometimes
Right.
it's about just literally being in that moment. It's not about talking, not about doing stuff. It's just about just being.
Yeah. Just being there. hmm Yeah, that's in that idea of the emotions kind of passing through you and not grabbing you and taking you down a rabbit hole, um, is what in meditation we call being in your observer, because what's actually happening is that you are observing yourself be emotional. And from the position of watching your emotion, which is what we kind of, if you think about it, that's what we kind of do. When you think of that place of watching your emotion is a very stable, calm, stable place. And that's one of the things that we emphasize in teaching meditation, is how to become more connected to that place so that you can go there, especially in times of, strong emotion.
Yeah, absolutely. Because it's so easy to just get caught up in these emotions, right? And get
Mm.
kind of dragged down if it's a negative emotion, or even the opposite, get overexcited and go too far the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that I don't know if I'd say it's a skill, but it takes a little bit of attunement to get to the point where you can kind of allow these things to pass through you without overdoing it. And it's great to enjoy the positive emotions, but again, you don't want to overdo it. And
Yeah, yeah,
with the sad emotions, sometimes it's important that we feel that sadness and we allow ourselves to feel it.
sure.
But again, we don't want it to destroy us, and it's getting that balance right.
But I would go as far as saying, yes, it is a skill. It is a skill because we can learn it and we can practice it and we can get stronger at it. I mean, it's as much of a skill as lifting weights. As we lift weights and increase the time under tension and increase the amount of the weight, our muscles get stronger, and our ability to, skillfully manage our emotions and our thoughts also gets stronger the more we practice it and the more, we learn about it. And so I think it's a skill.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I did say initially I think it's a skill, but then I
Yeah.
wasn't sure, to be honest. But I suppose it is in a lot of ways. It's something that you can learn to get better at. I suppose that fits that category
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
just fine.
mm-hmm. Right, right.
What kind of things do you do then, Bob, to kind of practice that kind of skill, I suppose, and develop that kind of ability to do that?
Well, meditation for me has been, the path. It's not the only path, and certainly it's not for everyone. Um, but it's old, it's ancient, it works, it's effective, it's efficient, and you know, it starts off with the 1 pound weights and it builds up to the 50 pound weights. And it's a process. And, most of the folks that find out that I teach meditation their first reaction is something like, well, I think that's great, but I could never do it because I just can't sit still, because I can't quiet my mind, and my mind is just so full of thoughts, and I'm always thinking about things and the like. And one of the first conversations that I have with the new student is to talk about those misconceptions and say, well, that you'll never quiet your mind. I mean, I've been meditating for 20 years, and I still have those voices in my head and the like. Sometimes we refer to it as the committee in your head, which is telling you, it wasn't good enough, you're not good enough, and you're not going to be good at it, and all the fear that you have for public speaking and thinking about what other people are going to think about you, and all of those thoughts that go through your head. I still have them, although I have befriended them, and I kind of giggle when they speak now, so they don't throw me anymore. They become less powerful, but they're still there, and there are environmental and evolutionary reasons why we have those thoughts, because we didn't evolve for the culture that we're living in now. We evolved as hunter-gatherers. We evolved in an environment that required a lot of physical energy during the day and a very low density caloric diet, like wild onions and berries. And it also was a time of working hard during the day and relaxing at night. We're just not, we're not evolved for that. And our mind is still the mind of the hunter-gatherer. So we're always scanning for danger. Our mind is always looking for what it is that's bothering us. And unfortunately, these days, the danger is not a snake or a tiger. It's a deadline, or picking the kids up, or am I going to be able to afford my medicine this week? Should I get that new job? How's my interview going to go? So it kind of becomes this chronic, undifferentiated stress that we experience, and our mind is always looking for the source of our stress, but because it's so diverse and so grayed out, we really can't identify it, and so that causes us even more stress, because we just don't have a mind that is evolved for the culture that we're living in, for the environment we're living in. And so we do have to take some kind of intentional measures to adjust our mind and become more skillful at managing it. If we don't, then, we're just subject to whatever the world throws at us. Not a lot of control.
Yeah, and then that makes us feel helpless and more stressed a lot of the time.
Stressed.
And then we get stuck in that horrible place that we feel trapped, and then we're stuck in this job that we don't want to be in, and we have to do all these responsibilities that we don't want. And it all comes down to not being intentional with what you're trying to achieve and trying to do, really.
Yeah, really, absolutely. So there's all kinds of, little changes. So I teach 2 courses. One is the business course. I also teach meditation on campus, as well as in my private practice. And sometimes you say things and you have no idea how much of a difference it makes in somebody's life. So one of my students in the meditation class was saying, I just feel like I always have to do things. I have to go to class. I have to do this. I have to do that. So I just, kind of offhand suggested, well, why don't you substitute the words get to instead of have to? So instead of saying I have to go to class, say I get to go to class. And it was amazing, because at the end of the class, when she wrote her final reflection, she and many of the other members of the class said that was the highlight of their whole class. That was the highlight of the whole class. They remembered that more than anything else, and it made such a difference. And so those little changes of perspective in how we see things can make a huge difference in, how we respond to life.
Yeah, I think how we frame things is so important, right? Because we could do the same things, but how we frame them in our mind and how we look at them, how our outlook is directly. I mean, look at the placebo effect, right? It's how you think about things
Mm-hmm.
can have a massive impact on you physically, not just mentally. So that's how powerful framing things in your mind is. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I
Mm-hmm.
think I think for me, I don't know what they do now in school. It's been a while since I've been in school, but I mean, they never taught you any kind of skills like that when you went through school, and no life skills, not how to manage stress and handle these things. And I think these are so important, and it's something that everybody needs going through life. And I
It,
would love to see them do more of that in kind of how people kind of mentally approach things and how they frame things in life and how they get the most out of living day to day. Because there's going to be stresses. There's no avoiding that.
mm-hmm.
That is the nature of life. But there's also going to be amazing opportunities and some beautiful things that we encounter and some great people. And I think we need to teach our kids how to make the most of life in general, not just how to do math and English. There needs to be an extra layer on top of that.
Yeah, yeah. I had sometimes I do a lot of pro bono work with kids in the foster system, whose parents have been abusive and they've been put into foster care, or kids in the juvenile justice system that have, committed what if they were adults would be a crime, and now they have to, be subject to probation or sometimes even, be in a juvenile hall. And I've done classes with them, and um, it's funny. The younger the kids are that look at um, looking at their thinking, okay, they take to it like fish to water. I mean, it's so much easier. They have such less conditioning to have to work against, that it makes such sense to them. And I remember there was one young man who said to me after, during our weekly meeting, as he said, that I was on the playground with, I don't remember the guy, Johnny. Let's say I was on the playground with Johnny, and he pushed me, and I really felt like I wanted to hit him, but I went over to the bench and I did my breathing, and I started thinking, and I thought that if I go back and if I hit him, then we'll probably never ever be friends. And this kid was 12 years old. So what a difference it makes when you teach children to not accept completely that their thoughts are true and accurate, but to examine them and seeing whether they're the result of an emotion or the result of something that somebody else told them, the conditioning, that's been imposed on them. If you can teach kids at a young age to really, be willing to examine their own thinking, uh, I think it'll make a huge difference. I think that it would change the world in one generation if that was what we did as a culture.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see why that would have a massive impact. Teaching kids from a younger age to understand their emotional intelligence, essentially bringing that
Mm-hmm.
up a level, and also understanding, having a bit of empathy for the other person, understanding, or maybe they've responded emotionally, and I can stop this escalating by controlling my emotions, and then I can reapproach it later on. The sooner you learn that in life, the easier it is for relationships and for everything to grow and to develop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, is what probably turning out to be one of the most effective, um, most efficient, let me say, most efficient and effective therapies that are being used. And the whole principle of it is that when something happens to you, a thought occurs in your head, and that thought may last a fraction of a second. But what it leaves behind is an emotional response. And based on that emotional response, you create new thoughts, and those thoughts direct your action. And that action, of course, becomes something that occurs to the other person, who likewise has a very quick thought, which leaves them with an emotional reaction, which causes them to act. And then that act is an act. So you go around and around and you create a circle of responses and reactions, which creates a story about what happened. And then that story gets stored in your database and forms the basis for your future thoughts. But it is that thought that occurs, which often happens and is gone before we notice it, that is what's controlling, our reactions and responses. And so one of the things that meditation helps us do is it helps us catch the thought. And even, just CBT therapy on its own focuses on thinking back and says, what was the thought that came up? And then analyzing, looking at that thought and says, is it accurate? Does that make sense? More importantly, was it helpful? And if we can catch that thought and we can look at it and perhaps change it, you can change your whole situation. Can I tell you a little story about this?
Yeah, please do.
So when my son was growing up and he was in his mid-teens, we played a game that I taught him. And the game was, whenever one of us expresses an initial thought about something, the other can start the game by challenging the thought and suggesting a different thought that could have come up. So we go out to Applebee's, which is a chain little restaurant, and sit down. And of course, the waitress comes over and she's all bubbly and nice. She says, hi, I'm going to be Janice and I'm going to be your waitress tonight. And I want to take care of you. And can I get you something to drink? And all sweet and everything. And as she's walking away, my son goes, she's really bucking for a tip. So game on, right? Game on. So I said, oh, yeah, now excuse me for this, but I mean, my kid was 16, so it was okay to say it. I said, so I said to him, yeah, well, maybe it's because she got some last night. Sorry for that. But, and then he goes, oh, game on, huh? So he goes, yeah, well, maybe her parents just gave her a new car. Like maybe you might give me one. And I said, yeah, well, maybe, she just, her boyfriend just proposed to her. And so we're going back and forth with all of these hypotheticals, which might explain why she was acting and could have been the initial thought that might have come up. And then finally I go, no, I know what it is. She just thinks I'm incredibly handsome. And he goes, yeah, but I go, no, game over. I'm going with that one. I'm going to stick with that one. I like that one. I want that one. Forget about it. Game over. So we went on throughout the meal with the assumption that what she was thinking was I was incredibly handsome. So we flirted a little bit, just a little bit. And she was great. And she was just a lot of fun during out the whole course and took great care of us. And we left her a big tip. And I went out there feeling superb. And he had a good time. And everybody had a wonderful time. If we had gone with the first thought that she was bucking for a tip, things would have turned out very differently.
Absolutely.
So we have that ability, to skillfully manage our thinking.
Yeah, and it makes a huge difference, doesn't it? Because, like you say, that turned into a positive experience. Whereas if you'd gone with the first thought, you probably would have been really irritated and thought, oh, they're just trying to get more money out of us, and you probably would have left less of a tip. You probably would have wanted to get out of there sooner. You wouldn't have engaged in conversation as much, and it's just one thought that just could have completely flipped that entire experience and meal on its head.
And the funny part about it is when you have that initial thought, you are convinced that it is true because it is your thought. I had it, I'm sure. You're convinced. If you don't think about it, it comes up like the truth. And you don't even question it. And I think that, it's helpful to question. not with
Yeah.
judgment, but there's something that we call in meditation, there's something we call childlike curiosity. You think of a kid in a park and he picks up a stone and he looks at it and he turns it around and it's got a couple of holes in it and throws it away, and he picks up a daisy and checks that out. That kind of childlike curiosity, if we can redevelop that in our lives, it's like an antidote to judgment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know where in life, because like you say, all kids kind of have that, don't they? That's just natural instinct in children. And I don't know where along the line that gets kind of stamped out of us, but
Yeah.
it almost definitely does get stamped out of us by life along the way, right?
Yes, it does.
I don't know where that is. I don't know if that's school, if that's home life, if that's working, or if it's a combination of it all, just kind of pushing us down this one path where it doesn't get rewarded, essentially.
Yeah.
But I'm
But
not sure.
again, if we're not even aware of it, then we have no access to it. But here, right now, in this podcast, your audience has now become aware of the phrase childlike curiosity. So now that they're aware of it, they can explain, they can explore it and maybe, make it a part of their lives. It does make you a happier person.
Oh, absolutely. And I've done a lot of kind of short form content creation lately on TikTok and stuff like that. And part of what I enjoy about that is the curiosity, the creativity, the chance to play around with things differently and explore different things and try different things. And I really enjoy that. And I think that's something that you see a lot on kind of TikTok, and people do kind of enjoy that kind of content and enjoy those things, yet they don't kind of do it in their own life. They just kind of watching it, other people do it through a screen.
Yeah. So you wonder, like, why? What is holding them back? What is restricting them? And generally, it has to do with judgment and their concern that other peoples are going to either like or not like. They're going to be accepted or not accepted. They're going to be right or wrong. The idea of wanting to be right, we put so much energy into wanting to be right, or at least not wanting to be wrong, that it stifles us.
Yeah, I think it comes down to like a fear of losing some social. Can't get my words out now. Social status, because that's kind of important and kind of ingrained in us from, again, evolutionary from years ago, right? Where being high up in a group kind of probably meant you'd have a bit more food, you'd probably be a bit safer. Whereas if you're lower down the pecking order in a group, when food was scarce or when there was other issues, then you had more, you were at more risk. So naturally, we want to be high up in our perspective groups, and that's kind of carried forward. But now it doesn't really matter, to be honest. If some social group doesn't accept you, you can you'll be fine, or you can go into another social group. It just doesn't really matter.
Yeah. And again, it goes back to, we're just not the animal that was evolved for the environment that we're in. We were evolved for something much more simple.
Yeah, I mean, you look at how fast technology has developed. Even just, I mean, when I was a kid in the kind of 90s, I mean, I didn't have a phone or nothing then. And now look at us, I can't go anywhere without my phone now, and it's got everything, it's got my life on it. And there's so much that's just developed with AI and everything else, and it just accelerates so fast that there's no way that we can evolve quick enough to keep up with it at the minute. So like you say, we do need to learn some sort of coping mechanisms. We need to have that kind of awareness of where we're at, what's going on around us, and how we can best look after ourselves in the modern world, really.
Yeah. And it's a challenge. Yeah, I have another expression, a term that I've kind of coined. I call it the work ethic of happiness. And, it just goes again to that kind of intentionality that's necessary, you know. And brain science, it's interesting. Brain science is affirming, what the ancient scholars, the ancient wisdom teachers, the ancient, folks, well, not just the ancient, I would say it goes, all of the wisdom teachers have always been teaching us, but brain science affirms that. And can I chat about that for a moment?
Of course, yeah.
Okay. So what we're finding is that, there's these two systems that work in opposition of each other within the body. There's the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems. And they tend to be housed in each of them in a particular area of the brain. The sympathetic nervous system is what we normally call our fight, flight, stress response. The parasympathetic nervous system is what we call our rest and digest, our relaxation, our creativity, our connection, spiritual side. And they're both housed in different sides of the prefrontal cortex right here in the front of the brain. And brain science has shown us that when the electrical activity on the right side of the brain is more active than the left side of the brain, we can be predicted to a very high degree of accuracy to be critical, caustic, self-judgmental, pessimistic, all that kind of stuff, negative generally, see things from a negative view. When something good happens to us, we have a tendency to say it was just an accident. When something bad happens to us, we go, yeah, that's how life is. That's a person that has more going on the right side. Person that has more going on the left side thinks just the opposite. When something good happens, he goes, that's how life is. When something bad happens, it's an accident. They'll see the glass as half full. They'll be optimistic, cheerful, connected, mostly spiritual and the like, and they'll feel like they're connected to the people around them and have good social support. That's the sensation that they'll have. What brain science has taught us is that you cannot intentionally reduce the electrical activity on the right side of your brain, the stress response. You can't. It can't be done. It can't be done intentionally. What you can do is you can build up the electrical activity on the left side of the brain, and once that comes into balance, it tends to act as a governor on the stress response. It tends to mitigate it, not to suppress it, but to at least balance it and control it. And so, we do know that when you take a moment to relax, when you watch a bird feed, when you feel spiritual and connected, that your left side is just going. And so you want to have those experiences to balance yourself out.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I think we just often don't think about these things, and we're often just kind of slaves to our routine. We get into this routine and we just continue and just do the same things over and over because it becomes comfortable, right? It becomes even if we're not happy and not enjoying it, it becomes a comfortable thing that we know what we're doing. We just do it on autopilot. It's like driving, right? It takes a while to get used to it, but then after a while you just do it on autopilot without even thinking.
I was once 310 pounds, and when it was time for me to lose weight, it's hard to diet. It's hard to lose weight, and it's hard to go exercise. But my wife found this poem. It was called "Choose Your Hard," and she read it to me once. And after that, every time I said, I don't think I'm going to go to the gym today, she would read me that one part, and the one part said, it's hard to be out of shape, and it's hard to exercise. Choose your hard. So it's hard to be enslaved by the world, and it's hard to take the time to break yourself out of it. Choose your heart.
Absolutely, and I think that's so powerful, and I think I don't think I've heard that poem before, but I've heard people say things along the similar lines, and it is true. There's no easy path, but I think the way I kind of look at it and the way I think about it is there's always a price to pay somewhere. So we either pay the price up front with putting the work in and doing the effort, if it's from a physical point of view, for instance, we're putting the effort in and then we reap the rewards later on, or we take it easy now and relax and reward ourselves now, but then we pay the price later on down the line. And I think that's
absolutely true. Yeah, when I talk to young folks, I often tell them the exact same thing. I said, in every life, there is going to be a certain amount of work that you have to do. The only choice you have is when you do it. If you do it as a youngster and you spend your time working hard at your studies, you can coast for a lot of the rest of your life. You can have a job in an office and the like, or a job doing what you love doing and coast, basically have an easier life. Or you can take it easy when you're young and you can work in construction for the rest of your life.
Yeah, and it becomes less fun as you age. That
It does.
Yeah, less and less fun as you go along. No, but it is right, and that is, that there is a price to pay somewhere along the line, and you choose where you pay that price ultimately. And it's difficult when you're young because you don't see it that way. You don't see that, and it takes somebody with a bit of wisdom to kind of help you with that. But if the ones that can and do see it are the ones that have go on to enjoy and have really good lives because they put the effort in up front and then they reap the rewards later on. And that's 9 times out of 10 that is the best approach.
Yeah, they did this experiment called the Marshmallow experiment.
Yeah,
there are a bunch of YouTubes. If you Google the Marshmallow experiment, you'll get a bunch, and they're hilariously funny. And the way that they did the experiment was the investigator would be with a young child, like 6, 7-year-old, 8-year-old child, and he would put a marshmallow on the plate in front of him, and he would say, "If you don't eat this marshmallow by the time I come back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows." And then the investigator would leave the room. And they're filming the kid. And all these films are on YouTube. And it's so funny because some of them sit there and they look at the marshmallow. Sometimes they'll pick it up and smell it or just lick it a little bit. Others just grab it and eat it. Some of them get up and they pace back and forth like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's just so hilarious what they do. But they tracked these kids for 30 years. And what they found is when that idea of putting off the immediate gratification for a later gratification was kind of inbred, if it was already there for some reason, I don't know whether it's genetic or learned, they didn't look at that. But if that was there at that young age, those kids wound up having happier marriages, better careers, being generally having a larger income and being more satisfied with life than the ones that ate the marshmallow right away.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. I'm definitely would have shoved that marshmallow straight in my mouth probably. That was me as a child, definitely. But what can you do? Yeah.
So do you have any questions for me?
I do. Well, we haven't even touched on your book writing or your publishing or anything yet, Bob. That's where I was going to go next. So tell me about the books that you've written and why did you kind of go into writing books after your law career?
Well, one of them, the first book I wrote, which I'm so happy to say is, the whole publishing thing is a whole nother podcast to talk about how you get published. And, whew, So the first one I wrote, I didn't know anything about the publishing industry, and so I got taken by a bunch of sharks, and it was a terrible experience. But I eventually wound up self-publishing it, and I've sold a few thousand copies, and it sat. But I'm so excited to say that my publisher of my second book has looked at my first book and now is going to publish it traditionally. And so I'm so excited about that. It's going to be released in a couple of months. But that was a thought experiment because it happened a few years after, the attack on the United States in September 11th attack on the United States, where the World Trade Center was bombed by the two planes. And after that, there was a lot of war going on, and it was mostly religious tainted. The Shia and the Sunni were, they were fighting each other. We were fighting both of them. The Muslim, and then there's the Jewish Palestinian things that are going on and were going on then. And it seemed like everybody was running around killing people in the name of God. Now, I have to say that my folks, my dad was Hungarian royalty, and the Bolsheviks invaded Hungary, and they killed all the royalty, and my father escaped. So we have no ancestors of any to speak with on that side. My mom was Roma Gypsies, and the Nazis wiped out all her ancestors, and so I have no ancestors on that side. So as a result, my folks came to the conclusion that there really wasn't much of a God that was worth worshiping. They weren't anti-religious, it was just non-religious. I grew up in a non-religious family. I never went to church. The amusement parks were their own kind of church, I suppose. So I was curious about all of that, and I don't have any fixed idea of what God is or is not, or what heaven is. Although lately I think I've come to the conclusion that there is some kind of universal energy that is intelligent. But what it is kind of above my pay grade. But anyway, back then, in the early 2000s, I was thinking that, just as a thought experiment, if God, thought the way that we think, and if God spoke English, the way we do, he might be looking down at all these people killing in his name and say, yeah, I don't know. Not exactly what I intended. And he might think that this might be a good time to make his presence known and say, yeah, my real intention is that you guys live together in harmony. So how could I make that happen in a way that would work as a thought experiment? So I brought God down in the little ticker tapes at the bottom of your television, messages from God. You're all my children. Your actions have consequences. You should live in harmony. I created a paradise. Don't blow it. So all these messages from God started to appear, in the little ticker tapes. And at first, all my characters think that it's a hoax. But over time, it becomes more and more things are happening that lead us to believe that it's not a hoax. My characters all have deep flaws in it, and it's really not so much a religious book as it is a book of kind of a psychological thriller asking what kind of flaws do we have that actually are redeemable? And if God became a question of fact instead of a question of faith, would we listen anyway? I mean, there are so many religions, so many people that claim to be religious that don't follow the tenets of their religion. You think of the people that have no conscience about dumping cancer-causing things in the river that flows downstream and is poisoning their fellow human beings. How can they do that if they claim that, they're religious, they claim to be Christian, or they claim to be, godly people, and they're doing that? How can they do that? And if God came down, would they stop, or would profit be more important? those were the questions that I had in my mind, and so I wrote the novel, to explore that. And of course, I won't tell you, how the world winds up as a result of God showing Himself. But each, some of my characters redeem, and some don't. And so that was my first book, and it came about because of that, and because of my curiosity about religion and belief and faith. Because I see that for some people their faith is very important to me, and they do everything they can to follow it. And other people, it's only words. It means nothing to them. My other book was a whole different situation because, as I mentioned, I grew up without a religion. My first introduction was Taoism, which is like a sister of Buddhism. And then I moved to North Carolina. There's not a lot of Taoists here, so I started attending Buddhist practices. And like I say, my 6 years with Master Ni was transformational. And I will tell you this, that working with Master Ni and doing the practices, there came a time, I know this might sound a little weird or woo-y, but it is true, that I actually felt my heart open. And it is a physical sensation when that happens. There's something that occurs. And after that, you understand that the function and purpose of your life is to ease suffering. So when I came to North Carolina, I devoted myself to only taking care of indigents and I guess what Jesus would refer to as the least of these. And that's what my life was about since 1988. So I was a different person than the one that married my wife. So that marriage ended. I married my current wife, who was a Bible literalist, what we call a Southern Baptist. And Southern Baptists had the reputation of being fire and brimstone. And if you're not saved by Jesus, you're going to spend, eternity in hell. And you'll be given eternal life if you do. And they believe the stories of the Bible literally, and very conservative Christian. And she was a Southern Baptist. I call her now, she's a recovering Southern Baptist. But she is a Bible literalist. And so she thought that all my, Buddhism and Taoism was pretty weird, but she recognized in me a certain set of values which were akin to hers. And I recognize in her that she is a saint. If she sees somebody that is in need, she'll move into it, without any question. I mean, obviously, this person needs something, and I can do something to help them. Of course, I'm going to do that. There's not even a debate with her. And then if somebody applauds her for it, she doesn't understand why she's being applauded, because obviously it needed to be done. She's just that kind of person. And in Buddhism, we would call her a bodhisattva or a saint. And so we met on our values, but she, like I said, thought my stuff was kind of weird, and I didn't understand, the science of her belief. I can accept that the world was only 4,000 years old and those kinds of things. So as far as our cosmologies went, we were quite different. So what I did is that in Taoism, a seminal book is called the Tao Te Ching, which is the classical book of the way of virtue. And it's a blueprint for how to live life. It's an owner's manual for being human. And it's written in 81 very short little paragraphs called chapters. So I started taking them and seeing if I could reimagine them in Christian terminology, looking for the same lesson in the Bible and then using the biblical references to convey the same ideas. And as I did it, I read it to her and she blew her away. She goes, "So that's what it is that you believe?" Yeah, I said, "Yeah, let me see the original text." So I would show it to her and she goes, "Oh, this is not so weird." So eventually I reimagined all the 81 chapters, and a publisher found out about it and reached out to me and said, "We'd like to publish it." And certainly they did. And here it is. So I notice the title of the book is "I Am the Way," because the word Tao means the way. So maybe Jesus was saying, "I am the way." I don't know, maybe. But anyway, so that contains my 81 reimaginings of the Tao, as well as the original text of the Tao for comparison. And so that was published. And now they said, "Well, let me see your original novel." And I showed it to him. He said, "Well, let's publish that too." So that's presently going to be released in about a month.
Love it. Love that. I'm not a religious person, Bob, but I do see the value in it, and I see, and I think there's a lot of different religions out there, and I think we should be looking at the common ground in those as well, because there's common themes that run throughout, and a lot of it is about helping people and helping each other and bringing communities together. And I think that's something that, even if you're not religious, that you can kind of believe in, and you can get behind. And I think it'll just make the world a better place if everybody kind of came together on that, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, when I was introduced to Taoism, it was through my therapist and Master Ni, and I was not religious either. But there's no God or any kind of supernatural beings in Taoism. You know the symbol, well, which I have it right here, the symbol, the Tai Chi. So do you know what the symbolism means?
No, explain it to me, because I probably don't have a clear understanding.
Okay. So normally you'll have the black, which is yin, with this white dot, which is yang, in it. And normally you'll have the white side here, which this is just colored, but you'll have the white side here, which is yang, and there'll be a black dot in it, which is yin. Well, this black dot inside of yin is yang, but it's not a dot. It's a seed. And the seed will grow, and it will transform yin to yang, and yang will be transformed to yin. So what the symbol symbolizes is that the universe is cyclical, that day turns to night and night turns to day, that winter turns to summer. But what most people don't understand in the symbolism is also that the time to advance will change to the time to retreat. That the good times in our lives will change to bad times, but the bad times will change to good times. And if you look back at your life, you'll see that there has been this ever-going cycle where there are times when it seems like everything you do is brilliant, and there are times when it feels like you're just walking in mud. And if you wait long enough, the time will change, and it will become the time when you're brilliant again. And so what Taoism teaches is, it teaches, number one, well, basically going with the flow. But going with the flow in such a way is that if I notice that this is a time when people are not listening to me, then perhaps I should shut up and not try to force it on them. But I should use the time to consider my presentation and refine it, because I know that the time is going to change when they're going to turn to me and say, "Oh, Bob, now what was that you wanted to tell us?" And when they do that, I should be ready to say it in the most effective and efficient way possible. And so what Taoism teaches us is that there are all of these different times in our lives, which is the flow, and then how to align ourselves appropriately with that flow so that we're being effective and efficient. When we one day we were with Master Ni, and we asked him, why do they call him Master? And Master Ni was always chuckling and giggling, always chuckling and giggling. And he said, "Oh," he said, "because I have mastered life." And then he walked off. And we go, well, that didn't give us very much. So we ran after him. He said, Master Nee, what does it mean to master life? And he turned around and his face became serious, which indicated he was about to tell us something that was important. And he said, when you have learned to interfere with things the least, yet have the appropriate impact, and knowing what the appropriate impact is, you have begun to master life. So what he was talking about was a life that was responsive, effective, efficient, and worked without much effort. And I have found that those teachings really get you there.
Yeah, that's pretty powerful, that actually, isn't it? And I think I'm definitely not at that point. So it's
no, neither am I.
No.
Neither am I. No, I think you have to go to a monastery and be a 72nd generation. I mean, there's wisdom passed down for 1,400 years. I think you have to be a monk in order to get there. But we can move in that direction. Let me give you, the example that he gave us. He said, if you're out in the ocean and you want to swim to shore, there are 3 ways to do it. 1, you can panic and drown. Not the best way. 2, you can just determine that you're going to swim to shore and just swim to shore. And you will get there, but you're going to be exhausted. The 3rd way is to take a look at the flow. And you'll notice that at times this tide is going towards the shore, and at times it's pushing you out to sea. Now, if you align yourself with it appropriately, when it's going towards shore, you're going to put out all of your effort and all of your energy, and you're going to work with all your greatest effort because you will make the most progress then. But when it turns around and it goes against you, you just need to rest and put out enough effort so that it doesn't push you out to sea. You just hold your place and wait until the tide turns, and then again put out your greatest effort. There is a time to put out effort, and there is a time to hold back. So if you can live your life that way, you'll find that it's effective, efficient, and interferes the least with others.
Yeah, I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Where can people kind of find you if they want to connect with you, or they want to learn a bit more about you, or even get hold of some of your books?
Yes. It would be at awiseandhappylife.com. And I have a couple of free ebooks that I wrote about what meditation is and what it's not, about ways of relaxing. They're free, they're downloadable, they have no obligation to them because, a lot of people ask me those questions. I figured I might as well just put it down in a book and give it away.
I like that. I'll pop the link in the show notes to make it easier for people to find that stuff and explore it, because it's definitely something I'm quite intrigued about, the Taoism and stuff like that. It's I think it's something that most people can get behind, really. This is.
Oh yeah. Could I read you
Yeah, please
one
do. Please do.
passage from the Tao? Okay, pick a number between 1 and 81. We'll just be random.
We go 39.
39. Okay. 39. Okay, so let me just explain a couple of terms. When in the Tao Te Ching, when you mention the master, it's referring to either a person who has gained some skill in living, or the superior parts of your own personality. Okay? And when it refers to the Tao only means the way. In other words, the way of living life effectively and efficiently. Okay? So this reads, and this is from the original Tao Te Ching: the masters of old attained unity with the way, the Tao. Heaven attained unity and became pure. The earth attained unity and found peace. The spirits attained unity so they could minister. The valleys attained unity so they might be full. Humanity attained unity so that it might flourish. Their leaders attained unity so they might set the example. This is the power of unity. Without unity, the sky becomes filthy. Without unity, the earth becomes unstable. Without unity, the spirits become unresponsive and disappear. Without unity, the valleys become dry as a desert. Without unity, humankind can't reproduce and becomes extinct. Without unity, our leaders become corrupt and fail. The great view the small as their source, and the high takes the low as their foundation. The greatest asset becomes their humility. They speak of themselves as orphans and widows, thus they truly seek humility. Do not shine like a precious gem, be as dull as the common stone. Now that's typical of that old Chinese, very packed. It's very deeply packed. You really have to pull that apart and unpack it. That's how the Tao is written. Can I read you what my interpretation was?
Yeah, go on.
Now, this is written in a Christian vein so that it would be more accessible to the Western mind. And the chapter title that I gave it is Better to Honor a River Rock Than a Golden Calf. You get that a lot quicker, right? And I have a quote from Marley Marlin. The earth does not belong to us, we belong to the earth. And so this is what I wrote. Since the beginning of time, there have been those that live in accordance to the way. For the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Understanding the unity of God's work, they are content to be humble and seek their place in the whole. Seeing the world thus, they make use of the sun and the rain. The earth is stable beneath their feet, and the valleys are made fertile. Their eyes are set on building solid foundations, and the leaders rule with compassion and justice. There have also been those who choose to live in accord with only themselves, not understanding the connectedness of creation. They dirty the earth, pollute the earth, cause the valleys to be barren, set their eyes on gilded penthouses, and their leaders rule with greed and hate. Better to honor a river rock than jade and a gold calf. So you see that's unpacked a little bit more accessible to the Western mind. And once my wife read it, when it was completed, she said to me, all the ministers that I've ever been in front of have told me what to do and what not to do and what's a sin and what's not a sin and how I need to get to heaven, but they never explained Jesus to me the way you have.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the fact that a lot of it is thought-provoking and it's about principles. It's about a way of living rather than do this, don't do that, do this,
Right.
don't. It's a more holistic approach. It's a more, it's a broader approach that you can apply to more things rather than being specific about certain things, right?
That's the whole thing. I am so honored these days to be getting letters from all over the country, and mostly what the letters say is, I left the church because I'm gay. I left the church because they didn't like the way I thought. I left the church because I didn't believe the way they wanted me to believe. And when I left the church, I also left my relationship with the divine. And in reading your book, I have been able to reestablish that. Thank you. And so that's just great. I believe that there is some universal intelligence, even if it is nothing more than the fact that our individual intelligence are somehow connected through the ether that we live in. I mean, it's all above my pay grade. I don't know, but there have been too many things that have happened in my life that have been more than just coincidental. It's, there are things in life like when you watch a sunset, you are immediately drawn to it. Yet at the same time, what you don't understand is that looking at the sun and soaking up those very red rays fill you with vitamin D and are literally good for you physically. Why is it and how did it come to be that we are emotionally attracted to something which makes a difference to our physical bodies like that? It just seems to me that there is an intelligent design, at least that's my current working hypothesis. I don't know that I have a particular belief in anything, but I do have, that's what I call it. It's my current working hypothesis. This is what I believe right now, and let's see if it works.
Yeah, and the thing is, I suppose, as well, having questions about stuff is a good thing anyway, right? Just to to question things, because it's so easy to just accept everything, and it's important, I think, that we have questions and that we explore different ways of thinking and different things, and we could be wrong most of our life and then discover something that is correct, but ultimately it doesn't really matter as long as it works for us, because I'm a scientific person, really. I would class myself as that, and I believe in science and this, that, and the other. However, we believe certain things in science that we've kind of proven until they're disproven, and then it becomes something else as well. It's a very similar thing. It's not that different in the thinking changes over time. We learn more, we discover things, but we only discover things by asking more questions and challenging the norms.
Another little story. So I went to New York with my wife Connie, the Bible literalist, and we went to the Museum of Natural History. And I said, I got to go down and see Lucy. Lucy was the first humanoid skeleton discovered in Africa, and they have her at the Museum of Science, the Natural Science in New York. Got to go see Lucy. So we go in, and there is the sign that says the Hall of Evolution. And she goes, are we going in there? And I said, yeah, come on. So there is this mural on the wall that stretches for dozens and dozens of feet, and it starts down at that end with a little amoeba. And the amoeba turns into a little creature, and then the creature gets up into a salamander, and goes all the way up, and finally we get the progression of humanoid species until we have man, the Cro-Magnon man and the Homo sapien walking here. And she looked at Lucy for a minute, and then she turned, and then she looked at this wall, and she looked at it. And she walked all the down to one end, and she looked all the way down. And then, she came to the primates and stood there. And she was transfixed by it. And I just let her sit as long as she wanted. And then she just turned around and said to me, okay, let's go. And we left. And honestly, we've never spoken about it. But after that, I noticed that the way that she saw a lot of different beliefs that she had previously held started to shift. But we don't talk about it because she goes, Bob, this has worked for me all my life, and, I'm not a guy to go change it now. And it works for her, and I love her, and she's a saint, and there's nothing about it that interferes with anything. So God bless.
Yeah, absolutely. And ultimately, if it works for you in your life and it brings you joy, and is it doing anybody any harm?
No.
Why do people need to challenge that? Ultimately, you don't, do you? As I suppose it's only an issue when, like you say, we go back to what we talked about earlier, when people are kind of using religion as a as a tool to do terrible things, really. And
Mhm.
that's when it becomes a big issue. If people are just living their life by their religion, whatever religion that may be, then great for them. As long as that's bringing them joy and they're living in a way that's not harming others, then that's fantastic.
Mhm.
Bob, I'm very conscious I've taken up a lot of your time, so I'm
Oh,
going to bring this to a close. But
okay.
before I do you have any kind of final thoughts or messages that you want to share with people?
Yeah, there's three things I would say. One is that you're not your thoughts. You're not your thoughts. You're so much more. You have no. You can't even imagine how much more you are than your thoughts. So you're the creator of your thoughts, and you have the freedom to create whatever thoughts you want to. It may take a little time, it may take a little skill, but you're not your thoughts. Yeah, that's it.
I concur, and I completely agree with that. You're not your thoughts, and it's just stuff that's passing through you essentially, and you can choose what you do with that, whether you hold on to it or whether you let it pass through and have a different thought and wait for a more positive one, or kind of be a bit more
Yeah,
intentional
wait.
and in creating those positive thoughts.
There is one more thing. I think that the purpose of life is to be happy. And I think that all the great wisdom teachers, starting with Confucius and Buddha, starting with the ancient emperors and the shamanistics, and going all the way through Martin Luther King and Mandela and Gandhi and Jesus. Everybody thinks that they came here to try to make you a better person and make the world a better place. And I don't think that that was their function. I think their function was because they want us to be happy. It just so happens that to be happy, the path is to be a kinder, gentler, more generous person. Because you notice that people that are greedy and hateful and ignorant are not very happy. So it just so happens that the two paths coincide. But I think that the purpose really, just be happy.
Yeah, absolutely. Amazing, Bob. Honestly, I could talk to you for ages. I really appreciate you coming on today and sharing your thoughts with us and your books and stuff. And I hope people do kind of dig in a little bit, because I think there's a lot of value there and a lot of positivity that people can take into their daily lives, really. So I really appreciate you talking to me today. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And thanks for the work you do and having a platform that lets people like me come and blabber on.
It's my pleasure. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, Bob. Take care. Thanks again for being part of this journey. Stay tuned. We've got even more great conversations coming your way.